Greetings. My name is Courtney Allen, and I am a doc student at UCF. And in completion or in fulfillment of class assignment EDH 7040, Research on the College Student, I've been asked to present a research article that deals with the development and success of college students. And so the title of the article that I selected was Fitting the Mold of School, of Graduate School, a Qualitative Study of Socialization in Doctoral Education by Susan Gardner in 2008. And throughout the course of this presentation, several things will be shared with you. One is the purpose of the study, the data collected, analysis of the key findings, research questions posed, and the theoretical framework used, relativity to higher education today, strengths and weaknesses of this study. Why is this study important? And what insights were gleaned about the college student? So, in order to get started, I think it's important to note that Nettles and Millett 2006 reported that there was a 50% attrition rate among college students, with the attrition rate of underrepresented students being even higher. And so with that being the impetus for this research, Gardner sought to examine attrition rates among underrepresented populations. More specifically, not to diminish other determining factors such as finances and aptitude, but more specifically, this study sought to examine the effects of socialization on attrition rates. Two local universities were a part of the study. One was a public land grant lower performing institution, and one was a public prestigious institution. 40 doctoral students participated in this study. 14 were males and 26 were females. And all of the students identified them or self-reported themselves as not fitting in. And so this qualitative study sought to delve even further into the attrition rate among these students from these institutions who were studying chemistry or history. All right. Please also note that of the 40 students selected to participate in this study, 3 were Asians, 1 was African American, and 36 were white students. So as it relates to socialization, Becker et al. Defined socialization as the process through which individuals learn to adopt the values, skills, attitudes, norms, and behaviors needed for membership in a certain society or group. Again, the values, the skills, the attitudes, the norms, the behaviors needed to be considered a part of this group or society. And so the Council of Graduate Schools 2004 further clarifies that unsuccessful socialization contributes to the decision for students to leave the program. Therefore, this increases the attrition rate of grad students. Grad students who feel that they didn't fit the mold of graduate school often found themselves leaving or considering leaving the program. The question asked in this research article more specifically was, how does socialization affect underrepresented students' persistence in and departure from grad programs? Again, the suggestion of fitting the mold also lends to the belief that there is a mold, and who created this mold. According to Burleson 1960, the history of education primarily served young white single male populations. Therefore, the initiatives and the definition of the mold was created based on these groups of, or this population. Okay. So more specifically, this study sought to examine, once again, how socialization affects underrepresented students from these two institutions who were from specific disciplines. And the specific disciplines were chemistry and history. According to Tyranny 1997, to further add insight into this whole notion of socialization, there is an organizational culture, just like in homes and churches and places of employment. There is a pulse and there is a culture that is representative of those particular settings. And what creates this organizational culture usually comes from activities or symbolisms that have a shared meaning. So Tyranny further stated that in order for this shared meaning to take place, there has to be a process by which individuals are indoctrinated into these activities and symbols. In order for shared meaning to take place, in essence, someone within the organization has to make sure that the newbie is aware of what's expected. All right. What are the roles? What are the rules? What are the expectations? What are the behaviors that are indicative of this socialization, of this culture? So socialization, according to Bard 1993, typically takes place in 3 phases. So in essence, Bard 1993 stated that if a student is going to be socialized, someone has to do it, and it needs to take place within these 4 phases, or developmental stages rather. The stages are anticipatory, formal, informal, and personal. And while there is a specific understanding for each phase, what is most important to glean is that socialization must take place in order for the students to be successful, and even more so among underrepresented students who come from various social economic backgrounds and cultures. All right. So this study, therefore, has the theoretical framework, rather, of this study is socialization, because it's believed that socialization is a part of every aspect of the educational journey, from orientation to the classes to the dissertation process and the degree completion. All of that involves socialization. And so when you look at this particular study, this particular qualitative study, it even adds more emphasis on how socialization affects underrepresented students. And so again, 14 males, 26 females were a part of this study, 3 Asians, 1 African American, and 36 white students. Of the students who participated in this study, 5 groups emerged, all right? And the 5 groups that emerged from this study were, there was women, students of color, older students, students with children, and part-time students. How does socialization affect these 5 groups of students from these 2 institutions and the students who studied history or chemistry? That is what this study sought to examine. All right, so why is this important to higher education? It goes without saying that in order for institutions of higher education to remain relevant, it must be conscious of the student populations that exist within the institutions. There is plenty of research, obviously, on the traditional student, but as this landscape of higher education changes, we must be conscious and aware of how these changes of student populations affect the overall recruitment and retention process that colleges and universities undergo, because it definitely does. There has been more attention and focus on, there must also rather be more attention and focus placed on the programming and supportive services put in place for these various populations, and this study highlighted that. It's important to note, as it relates to the findings of this study, there were several reasons for the decline. And the reasons for the decline amongst women, the main one across both institutions was sexism. Both females who attended the two institutions reported feeling or having experiences of sexism. Additionally, 11 of the 12 students reported that they needed additional support, either professional support or even medical support. 12 of the women reported that they were taking antidepressants. They felt as though that it was a male-dominated society, especially for the women who studied chemistry, and few female faculty. A lot of the students, including the males, noted that the females did not have anyone that looked like them in this field of study. And so it caused them to question their place in the academy. As it relates to the reasons for the decline for students of color, the top reason was discrimination. And if you were female and a student of color, it was like considered a double whammy. For older students who deemed that they didn't fit in, 16 of the 40 students were 30 years old or above. And most of this effect was felt by the chemistry students once again. And I will say that overall, the students who felt the most or felt as though they didn't fit in the most were students who were in the science field. So the next group of students were the students with children. And not surprisingly, this was a main concern for the women. 8 of the 40 students had children, and obviously they experienced this tug of war, in essence, this internal conflict. Do I spend time with my children or do I do homework? As well as, how do I maintain work, or the requirement or the need for me to work and maintain in school, as well as spend time with my children? As a result, the older students who were participants in this study, they felt it was very challenging for them to keep up and prioritize. Similarly, with the older students, they felt this feeling of displacement, as if they didn't fit in because they were overoccupied with other things such as age or taking care of their children. They both felt that they had difficulty connecting with their peers as well. As for the part-time student, I thought this was quite interesting. Over 40.5% of the grad students of students who participate in grad school are part-time. And this is according to the National Center for Educational Statistics in 2003. And since over 40% of the students who are participants of grad school are part-time, this definitely has to be looked at differently. The part-time students felt that they were not integrated into the program as well because they were part-time. These students also felt as though they regretted not being able to spend more time getting to know their peers. This group also found that they didn't receive the full socialization process. And so I found that to be very, very, very interesting. So what are the implications for continued research that were highlighted in this study? Not fitting the mold, I think, was something that, or fitting the mold rather, is something that we sometimes take for granted because for the most part, it is assumed as something you just do, right? But there isn't a whole lot of research or intention placed on how you do that. And prior to this study, fitting the mold for graduate school was assumed to be this monolithic experience, but the researcher highlighted that it is not, and we must treat graduate students according to their needs, or we must have an awareness of the needs of the various types of graduate students. The graduate student experience is not the same for all. And with that being said, how do we become more aware of what their experience is? This research definitely highlighted that. The need for more representation of diverse faculty was highlighted in this. That is certainly an implication for continued research. Additionally, administrators and faculty need to be involved in this process of ensuring that students are socialized. How involved are faculty and administration in this socialization process? Because this greatly affects not only the types of students that are recruited, but the retention of these students. Other things that offer continued implications are support groups and supportive services needed for these populations of students. Overall, I will say that this research certainly broadened my perspective on the socialization process. There were a few weaknesses and strengths noted. Of the strengths, I will say that it highlighted the areas of research needed, and I think that's critically important. If you don't know what the areas of need are, there's no way to fix them. It also offered insight on the disparities that exist with how students are socialized. There is a great difference between how white male students are socialized versus how Black females are socialized. And we need to be cognizant and consciously aware of that. This study, one of the strengths I found is that it brought more attention to the needs of various grad students. Students feel connected when they feel like they're a part of the process. Students feel more connected not only when they're a part of the process, but when they are considered, when their needs are considered. A few weaknesses were gleaned from this study. The data, that was almost non-existent, but the worthiness of the data that did exist was questionable, as it could have been preceded by much bias because the researcher was in grad school as well. How students were selected to participate in the study was also questionable. I felt as though there was unequal representation from the groups, considering that there were 3 Asians, 1 African American, and 36 white students in this study. How representative was that? And how accurate is the data? And I feel as though a broader context could benefit from this research. Institutions with more diverse students, institutions that even cross boundary lines and state lines would have benefited and offered more strength to this research. And so, again, insights gleaned about the college student and the importance of this study certainly include the fact that there has to be more cultural awareness, and not only cultural awareness, but a willingness to understand the various perspectives that college students come from, the needs and the backgrounds that affect their success, because it definitely affects the student's success. Overall, I felt that the research provided much insight as to what fitting the mold is and how that definition and understanding needs to be broadened, and certainly considerate of the the various types of students that enter into grad school today. And if students are going to persist in and complete grad school, it would behoove institutions of higher learning everywhere to delve deeper into these various factors. Thank you for your time. I hope that you gleaned something from this presentation, and I look forward to your positive feedback and comments that will help further my understanding as well of this research. Thank you so much.